Hey everyone, my name is Alex Nichiporchick. I'm the CEO of TinyBuild. You may have seen us walking around conventions when there still were conventions, walking around these bright orange hats, and we've been around since 2011 when we launched our first game. And today I'm just really thrilled to be talking at ADVA Digital. And when we were talking with Martin, we just wanted to get a presentation going about the state of publishing, right? What is publishing? Why you should be interested? What are the do's and don'ts? And what happened was I wrote a really formal presentation with slides and inspirational speeches, and I decided to fully scrap that because, to be honest, it doesn't really feel authentic. So instead, I have this camera open, I have a few notes, and I'm going to be editing this video to be a little bit more upbeat in its final form. Please don't judge my editing skills, and let's get right into it. So we have started out in web games all the way back in 2011. If you look up TinyBuild and No Time to Explain, at that time we were known for a little flash game called No Time to Explain that we did a Kickstarter for. And we spent about 2 years on developing that game before it actually launched on Steam. And thinking about this almost 10 years ago, like 2021 is just around the corner. So it was a really different time back then. And as I was writing this presentation, I was like, maybe it makes sense to talk a little bit about the evolution of indie publishing. And then I can come up with a catchy title like, the death of indie publishing, right? And really, it's not the death of indie publishing or publishing in general, or, double A publishing, as some people might call it. It's an evolution. So this presentation will be me rambling and drinking. Let me just cover this. Let me see. Yeah, that's definitely not copyrightable. And drinking definitely soda, talking about the state of indie publishing, how we got here, and where we believe it's going, and hopefully provide some useful tips along the way. So taking a sip here. Yep, all branding is covered. Everything's fine, Martin. No copyright material. So, like I said, we started out in the web game days, in the Flash game days. And the reason I want to start our story there was because South America as a region was actually doing quite well in the web game days. So those of you who are as old as me in their 30s, you might remember that. Because a lot of indie developers actually started in the same region. My air conditioning just turned on. Okay, it's done now. God damn it. So I had to turn off the AC here to cool down my basement where I'm filming, because I have all of these studio lights around, and I have to turn off the AC, otherwise it's way too loud. So I have literally half an hour before I start sweating here. So, bear with me, this is going to be a fun ride. Anyway, getting back to Flash games. There was a platform called Flash Game License where a lot of indie developers, they learned that, hey, you can use Flash to make games, and they had a monetization mechanism. It was a very simple mechanism where sponsors or portal owners, like you might know, Congregate, Newgrounds, they would actually get bids from sponsors, where developers would get bids from these sponsors to get their games branded with their websites. And that was actually on the sponsorship side in that industry. I was working at a company called Spill Games. And what happened there is as the web games market started going down, the tools to create games started developing just rapidly. As soon as Unity made a splash on the scene with their web game player, a lot of Flash game developers actually tried Unity and then started their transition into web games. We didn't really do that. We actually developed our first game in Flash, ActionScript 2. Give us 2 thumbs up for that. Yeah, you can imagine how that went with a Zinc projector with local files transmitting data between each other to communicate with the Steam API. It was a little bit messy, and we did burn out. We worked on this game for 2 years part-time, but what it really means is that you work 2 full-time jobs when you're doing a full-time job and making indie games. So that was our first kind of experience in the premium game scene. And what happened was, well, fortunately, in the grand scheme of things, is after being burned out, we did ship the game on Steam, being in the second batch of Greenlight. Who remembers Greenlight, right? And the game exploded. It just went viral everywhere. We realized that YouTubers are the main marketing driver. And again, this is 2013. So we started in 2011, we shipped in 2013. The opportunity of being on Steam at that point was basically you were done, right? Your game goes into the upcoming list, it launches, it gets tons and tons of visibility, and then you're pretty much golden. So it was a gated platform, right? And what started happening after 2013 is the tools started developing even more rapidly, and Steam was still like kind of curated via Greenlight, but you could still, go on and get a publisher to get access to that platform. That was the value of publishers at that point. The same thing with consoles. Like, if you're from a region that doesn't have direct access of communication to the main platforms, then odds are you were not getting any dev kits or anything like that. Like, you can tell by my accent, I'm from Eastern Europe, from a little country called Latvia. So when I was in Latvia, there was basically no game development there. And I can see a direct parallel of what's happening in Eastern Europe, the region where I'm from, and South America. And what I'm seeing is, in some ways, it's a mirror of what happened in Eastern Europe. Because what happened there was technology was first. In Eastern Europe, in Russia, Belarus, the Baltic states, Ukraine, it was very tech savvy in terms of education. However, art and production were lacking significantly behind. So at that point, when the indie revolution started happening with platforms opening up, art kind of started catching up, right? So now you're seeing games that look pretty good and are very technically savvy from Eastern Europe. What I've been seeing from South America was a mirror of that, kind of like the opposite, is that there were a lot of really beautiful looking games, especially during the Flash game dev days. Now, that's a mouthful. So, and technology, at least in my experience, started catching up in the South American region. So you had really great art, and now that technology has caught up, you're in this perfect space when I'm personally seeing tons and tons of games coming out and game pitches coming our way from the region, and I'm really excited to talk to you guys about this evolution. So let's get back to the timeline. What was happening is that, I'm going to edit that one out. So as Steam started opening up, as the App Store started gaining a lot of traction, as the consoles started getting their own indie developer programs in play where you can essentially self-publish, the role of a publisher started shifting. You could see this very evidently with the approach that developers take in terms of why do you need a publisher. It used to be you would need a publisher to get access to platforms, and right now it's shifted towards more getting marketing and funding. And at the same time, the market, because it became open, started oversaturating. Now, in an oversaturated market, a few interesting things happen. One is your visibility drops drastically, right? Competition becomes really fierce. The marketplace gets way oversaturated. I have some stats here on the number of Steam games coming up. I'm going to put it on the screen over here. But essentially, since it's really small here. Okay, there we go. Essentially, since 2018, over 7,500 games started launching on Steam every year. That's 25 games every day, or close to 35 games every workday. And when you think about it, you're competing every day for the time and the effort of millions of players alongside dozens of other products. And initially, when we started full-on publishing back in 2015, 2016, that was our primary goal, is how do we solve the discoverability issue? And we did a lot of interesting things that moved the needle for us. Like we did Twitch Plays Punch Club. We did a lot of work with streamers before AAAs started to notice that streamers and YouTubers were the primary driver of sales. Because frankly, getting a review doesn't really mean that much. What it does is it helps YouTubers discover the content that they want to play. Now, in a market that is oversaturated, in a market that has a lot of tools and knowledge available to everyone, it kind of like it makes the world a little bit flat, right? So in a flat world, when everyone has more or less equal opportunities, you really need to figure out, well, why do you need a partner or a publisher? And we started asking this question right around 2016 because we started seeing, so that was 4 years ago, we started seeing that there is this trend, at least in the indie publishing space, of what we call transactional, again, air quotes, sorry, I do that a lot, transactional relationships. So transactional relationships means that I'm a publisher, I might have some marketing power, some production experience, some auxiliary services like, PR, QA, localization, whatever. And you're a developer, you approach me, I fund your game, we publish it, it becomes successful, and sometimes we'll do DLC, sometimes we'll do a sequel, but what I've seen happen more often than not is if a game is super successful, then the dev team kind of like gets either bored or wants to do like their own thing, and they branch off to do their own thing, which is typically a new IP. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that approach. I fully support that approach, and I think that that lets a lot of creativity flow. And that was in 2016, that was 4 years ago. But what we started noticing is that, well, if this trend continues of too many games launching, and the question becomes, what is the value of that new intellectual property that you have just published, and how do you leverage it into something bigger? And also, what is the cost of not continuing expanding that intellectual property? That was a question we asked ourselves, and at the same time we were working on a game called Hello Neighbor, which is this stealth horror game where you play against an AI, and we saw that the game was going viral, like all over the place. So essentially we had a huge fire burning, and then we were just like pouring gasoline on top of it with the marketing efforts that we were doing. And we're like, okay, we want a situation where if this really, really blows up, where we just say, okay, well, this game has shipped, and then let the team do something else, and this IP will just we'll probably publish it on every platform possible. But what is the roadmap for it? What is the plan moving forward with something that really takes off? And we decided to use this opportunity to kind of like imagine you have a train that is like kind of like accelerating really early on and it's moving faster, faster, and faster, but there are no rails in front of it. So we were on this train like putting rails in front of it as we were going. It was a really, really exciting time for over 3 years as we were working on it, and we originally launched it in 2017. And what we had seen were that the facts were all lining up that this game would be big. It would become a new IP that gets recognized, and we knew we had to do franchising. We need to figure out what is the plan moving forward with this game, and how do we make it bigger and into something that you're going to remember 5, 10, 20 years from now. So we decided to enroll a licensing agency to help us with merchandising. We decided to, because of that, we had an opportunity to make a book series. So I just remember like reading anonymous snippets from possible writers, and then we eventually found one. And right now we have over 2 million books sold. Actually, I didn't get the latest stats. It's probably closer to 3 million books based on the game. And as we shipped the original, we were like, okay, well, we come to the dev team and we go like, well, what do you want to do with it? What do you want to, where do you want to take it? And the team said, okay, we want to expand the story with a prequel. I was like, all right, that is actually a really good idea. Let's do that. At the same time, we had just shipped Party Hard 2 with another dev team in Ukraine. And we were like, okay, what is that team's next project? Because we really loved working with the team of Holograph. And we sat down to play a few board games like Werewolf or Mafia. And we're like, okay, this concept of that feeling, that emotion that you get in those games, where you play a role undercover, you're trying to pretend like you have an ulterior motive, and you're trying to essentially lie to people in their faces, which gets your adrenaline pumping. How can we transfer that into a game, a video game feeling. And that's how the idea for Secret Neighbor got born. We're like, okay, well, what if there is a game where there are, let's say, 5 players, and one of them is a creature, something monster in disguise, and the monster player needs to lure all of the other players into traps, and then turn back into like a disguised form to try and frame other players. Like remember that scene in the movie called The Thing by John Carpenter, where they're like testing everyone's blood? We want to recreate that in an organic setting where it wouldn't be a game rule, but it would be what the game systems facilitate. And we brought this idea to the Hello Neighbor dev team, and we were like, okay, well, this makes sense. There is a bunch of kids trying to figure out what is trapped inside the basement door, and we added a little bit of mythical lore to it, where one of the players would be the neighbor in disguise, and then when he takes his true form, he can, definitely not strangle them. Definitely not. It's rated E10 for everyone. They just, he just grabs them and then they disappear with posters flying everywhere. It's totally innocent. It's a very kid-friendly game. So what happened was, at the same time as the original game launched back in 2017, we essentially kickstarted the development of a prequel, of merchandising, of a book series, and a multiplayer spin-off. We knew the multiplayer spin-off would take more time than the prequel, so therefore the prequel launched in 2018, and last Halloween of 2019, we actually launched the multiplayer spin-off. And just recently, we had announced the proper sequel called Hello Neighbor 2, which is coming out next year. The question is what we're doing in the meantime, and I'm not ready to talk about that yet. But that just goes to show how, instead of doing a single transactional relationship with the dev team, we have partnered up really integrally, and we have made something that was bigger if we were separate. Because now we know that the brand has value, it has recognizability, and it's something that we can continue expanding into more games, more media. And actually a few months ago, we showed off the pilot for the animated series. And looking back at this like 4 years ago, I was like, well, this is never gonna work. How can you facilitate something like this? But it did. And what we have been doing since then, with every single new contract, with every single new developer we engage with, is have a lot of chats about, well, what is the team's motivation? What do you want to achieve? What do you want to build in the long term? Because I feel like there is not that much value in this transactional relationship compared to something that has long-lasting value in a partnership, where, let's say, you have a fantastic game that's the flagship product. You want us to publish it. Instead of just discussing okay, well, we do the marketing, we handle the QA, you do the game development, we'll do this test. We talk much broader. We talk about all of the things that this thing can do, where can it go, and also about scenarios where, like I mentioned earlier, we were indie developers. We were working from our bedrooms, working 2 jobs, essentially working on an indie game and a full-time job at the same time. And how can you create a situation where the flagship product launches and, for example, you need a break, right? You want to work on something else. We try to figure out situations where that makes sense for everyone, where if you don't want to continue working on it, we still want someone involved from your side to be essentially the vision holder for what initially made the game great, and then engage other teams. And that's what we've been working on really rigorously. You've seen that we have opened up a studio in Idaho, in Riga, Latvia. There will be hopefully a bunch of announcements by the time that this presentation goes live, where we are working towards building a network of studios that can help support creatives such as yourselves, the one watching, to build something much bigger. And you can tell I'm super excited about this, and that's why I really want to scrap this formal presentation way, right, and talk about what actually excites me and what I believe where the industry is going. So let's talk about concrete things, right? I bet one of the questions that you guys have is, well, Alex, you're talking about these brands and franchises. All of that sounds great, but what are you actually looking for? What kind of games? Well, I think we're actually in a very interesting position in the market today, where we have seen so many games that are linear and content driven, where during production, I would say about midway through production, let's say you have a level-based game that has a lot of content, a lot of cutscenes. It creates a situation, especially for smaller teams, where you kind of like lock yourself in a grind, right? Let's say you have 50% of the game done, right? And you add like 5% every week, for example. The amount of things and progress you add during the later stage of development actually adds less and less to the overall picture. And developers and producers listening to this might understand the feeling that I'm talking about, where you kind of feel like, you have 10 systems, you have added one more, you have added 10%. Then you have added the 12th system, it's even less. And then it's like a diminishing return. So what excites me personally, especially if you're a smaller team looking to make an impact in the market, is focusing on games that have systems-driven designs. And what that means in practice is, imagine, I have 10 systems, right? And then I add system number 11. And that system number 11 might connect or expand upon all of the previous ones. And in that case, what happens is I might, by adding, like essentially 10% more content, I have actually added 50% more content towards the end player, towards the user experience. Because maybe I have added a system that reinvents crafting, or like something that adds a new layer to the crafting system. We have a few examples of this where we have seen how games just become alive, and how teams of up to 10 people can leverage systems-driven design to create much more playtime. And if you really think about it, it's about competing for players' time, not necessarily for people's money. Because what's happening in 2020, aside from like all of the terrible things in the world, is we're seeing an evolution in game monetization. We're seeing this with programs like Apple Arcade, with Google Stadia, with Microsoft's Game Pass, with PlayStation Now, is that people are willing to pay for commodities like Netflix, like their own subscription, and get content from there. Now, this presents a very interesting challenge for us as game developers, because how do you monetize post-release in a subscription service? Fortunately, most of these programs will allow you to monetize post-launch. And that's why we have taken many different approaches with system-driven games to facilitate that. For example, on April 1st, we launched Total Reliable Delivery Service. And we had a deal with the Epic Game Store where we would launch the game completely free. So, those giveaways that everyone logs into the Epic Game Store for, like when you launch Steam and you have the Epic Game Launcher running, it kind of like gives you a pop-up that says, hey, grab your free game. So we were one of those, and we've had over 6 million downloads in the first week of that giveaway, and we monetized post-download. What that means is that you get the game, right? You get the base game for free, and then you have a ton of DLC, cosmetics, new maps, everything to go alongside with that. The same game then launched into Xbox Game Pass with the same premise. And we also launched the game on mobile, where we did essentially the same thing. And it's very counterintuitive when you think about it, because the game is paid on most platforms, right? You can still buy it on Xbox, and after the first 2 weeks on Epic Game Store, it went into full paid. So why would you make the game completely free on mobile? Well, because that's the way to go on mobile. I'm sorry, guys, you can't sell premium on mobile. So this goes back to my question of, what are we looking for? We're really looking for something really interesting that we can do in the market that can create a story that makes waves. And I think that's the only way to differentiate yourself when it comes to an oversaturated market. You need to continue doing something super interesting all the time. And if we talk about like, more specific game genres, I'm really interested in the whole idea of multiplayer sandboxes. Like player-to-player interaction is something that I believe has insane amounts of content available behind it, where users create content for themselves by interacting with each other or by just flat out creating content. I highly recommend that everyone just always follows the YouTube trending tab, gaming trending tab, and just looks at the top 100. And if you look at over the past 6 months and count the videos, 30 of them will be Roblox, the other 30 will be Minecraft, and then will be like a combination of Fortnite and something else. And most of those games are UGC driven. They are user generated content driven. So we are really interested in UGC and systems driven design. Having spent hundreds of hours in games like Factorio and games like, well, I want to admit it, but I did spend a lot of time in Roblox. Those mods are quite amazing. But the games where you can, as a game developer, you can give players tools to entertain themselves, that's where I believe the money is in the long run. And especially with shifting business models, there is a lot to think about when it comes to monetization. Of how do you monetize, because who knows, maybe we're going to be in a world next year or in 18 months where free-to-play as it is, not the evil free-to-play on mobile, but like something like what Fortnite does with season passes, that might just be where the industry is headed. It's not to say that you should not focus on single-player games. You absolutely should if that is your passion. What I will say, if you're making a single-player game, is really think about how can you make the mechanics go alongside emergent gameplay. And what that means is how can my experience in the game be unique to yours, and by doing that I will want to share my own unique experience and thus drive virality of the game. That is a really puzzling question for a lot of game developers. And what I'm seeing is that it's more difficult for people who come from AAA development, because in AAA you would typically have everything like lined up, scoped out. What is exactly the player going to do? Where is he going to be looking? Whereas what we've seen with some games that are physics-based, for example, it's enough to have a funny joke that is like a ragdoll falling about in a unique situation to that player. I think the best example we have had recently was with Toy Reliable Delivery Service, where it's a game about delivering packages, and it's like physics driven. It's kind of like Gang Beasts and Human Fall Flat in terms of character controller. And we had these like forklifts that you can use to raise a package to deliver it to a higher zone. What we didn't understand is that players would use the forklifts to raise another forklift, and then that forklift would raise another one, which I could never manage to do, but players did, and streamers did, and YouTubers did, and everyone loved it, to drive the virality of it. There were tons and tons of GIFs on this all over the web when we launched, and we're like, okay, well, systems-driven design, it works. And I'm not saying just jump on a physics-based quirky style game. What I'm saying is think about how to integrate those kind of elements, those kind of feelings into your own game experience. Because if my experience is unique to yours, well, that's going to drive me towards sharing. And if everyone is sharing your content, then you're going to have a really successful game. And the publisher's job is to help you figure out, or I believe it's to help you figure out what are those magic moments in the game before we even move to production or when we're in pre-production. And then help you focus on those. And then think of it this way. Starting a fire from scratch is very difficult. Like, try it. Try rubbing two sticks against each other. You're going to burn your hands. But if we figure out where is the flame, like where is the spark, then your partner, all they need to do is just pour gasoline on it. It's much easier. And what we've done is created a situation or a structure where you can, once your game takes off, leverage that structure to take it to the next level. Be that with production expertise, be that with porting, be that with localization. We have gone through this multiple times now, and we have proven that we can create something of scale. And this is not a plug. I mean, it kind of is a plug, but like kind of like self-advertising. But I think everyone who is listening needs to ask themselves, what do they actually want from a partner? I have written an in-depth article on tinybuild.com. There's a little link at the top there that says how to pitch games. It also has other versions of my presentation where I talk about the death of indie publishing, really the evolution of it. Please go ahead, read that. It might be useful for you, even if you're not pitching to us, right? Like it's just a format that we have kind of liked to standardize, and I think other publishers also really, really appreciate that. Now, if you want to make something awesome, my contact details are right here. I think I'll edit them right there. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from you all, and enjoy the conference. Thank you so much. Shh. Did I make it in under 30 minutes? Woo! Awesome. Thanks everyone. Bye.